Announced a major drug bust here in Georgia. They say potentially saved
people that are bringing drugs into our country. We're going to kill them.
At 5:42 in the cold Georgia morning, the hallway lights inside a judge's suburban home flickered once before the sound of FBI and ice boots broke the silence. A battering ram struck the front door, sending splinters across the floor as tactical flashlights cut through the darkness. Inside, agents found a hidden wall packed with heroin, stacks of cash sealed in plastic, and rifles arranged like someone preparing for a quiet war. A phone left unlocked revealed encrypted messages tied to a Venezuelan cartel figure that investigators had chased for years. What began in that silent house would soon expose one of the most stunning betrayals inside the American justice system. Let's find out with military power. And if you want more investigations like this, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next mission. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from a raid or a confession. It went from a quiet room late at night where an analyst stared at a financial report that refused to behave like a normal investment. Judge Marcus Hale's name appeared again and again in the data attached to a set of companies that seemed to live on paper but nowhere in the real world. At first, the pattern was small, just a few odd transfers that were too neat, too careful, too deliberate. Then the trail widened and the shadows behind it began to take shape. The investigators began with the files that banks automatically send into the system when something looks unusual. Most of the entries were labeled as consulting fees. The numbers felt unnatural. They were trimmed into strange shapes as if carved by a hand trying to stay hidden. Not a single transaction came from a company with employees or office space. Each wire passed through a place that did not have a desk or a door. When agents searched the addresses, they found empty registration lines in Delaware, digital signatures in Panama, and mailbox companies in Curacao that could barely explain their existence. 47 businesses, not one legal footprint. It did not take long for the pattern to reveal what it truly was. The companies were shells. They were built to catch money for a moment, wash it, then send it to the next safe point. Over 6 years, $41.7 million traveled through this invisible network. The money came from South American exporters known to be controlled by a Venezuelan cartel. It passed quickly through the empty companies, then appeared as clean income tied to accounts connected to Hale. From there, it spread to other assets that initially appeared to be honest. Only when the agents followed the trail step by step did the truth become impossible to ignore. This was not sloppy criminal financing. This was a disciplined system. As the task force reviewed the documents, they noticed something more disturbing. The money did not move in random bursts. It moved with a rhythm. Transfers peaked during the same weeks that cartel shipments were rumored to cross certain counties in the southeast. The tempo repeated so often that the data itself felt like a coded message. That message became real when the raid on Hale's house uncovered the phone he had forgotten to lock. On that small screen were encrypted conversations with a cartel figure known as Tindagua. The chats matched the banking trail almost perfectly. One line stood out like a flare in the night. Run 38 loads this quarter on the same route with no roadside interference. That sentence changed everything. The term loads matched known slang within the cartel's logistics arm. The exact route matched the repeated pattern of banking cycles that had confused analysts. No roadside interference suggested something far darker than simple luck. Someone with authority had promised the route would be clear. If you want more missions like this, hit the like button to support the channel. Someone had ensured the convoys could pass through counties where random stops or inspections should have occurred, but never did. Investigators calculated the weight behind that message. Each load was between 50 and 120 pounds of narcotics. That meant nearly 1 ton had crossed through the region in just 3 months. Every pound had been cleaned through the companies linked to the judge. Every shipment moved through corridors that seemed strangely calm whenever the cartel needed them to be. Calendar records from Hale's devices added another piece to the puzzle. There were meetings listed as lunch or golf that occurred on the same days. Significant sums moved through his shell companies. There were calls with unnamed partners during the weeks that cartel shipments were expected to reach distribution hubs. There were short travel entries marked as legal seminars in states where critical phases of the laundering cycle were underway. Each entry looked harmless alone. Together, they formed a roadmap. Inside the task force, agents began using a phrase. Hale did not simply approve passages, he designed pathways. That idea became their guiding principle because the data pointed to a man who understood the system at a level that allowed him to exploit its blind spots. His position as a judge provided him with insight into how warrants were issued, how patrol patterns evolved, and how long specific investigations took. He used his knowledge to keep the corridor open. The financial map grew larger with each new document. Bank ledgers stored in off-site units matched the digital spreadsheets captured from seized devices. The exact numbers appeared in separate places, confirming that the laundering was not an accident or a misunderstanding. Payments from South American exporters matched truck rentals within the United States. Vehicle fuel receipts lined up with known smuggling routes. Utility bills for small storage facilities appeared during the same months that the cartel needed temporary holding sites. Step by step, the case took shape. The base was built from the shell companies. The walls were made from chat logs and calendar entries. The roof was formed from shipment estimates and distribution patterns. By the time federal prosecutors examined the entire picture, they saw a deliberate design with intent and purpose. This was not about one judge accepting bribes. This was about a man who acted as an engineer inside a criminal network, guiding money and product as if he were directing traffic. The deeper the investigators went, the more they realized how large the network might become. Each transfer led to new places. Each company pointed to the other companies. Each communication hinted at more collaborators. The numbers are connected to assets scattered across several states. That meant the next phase would not take place in a quiet financial office. It would unfold in warehouses, industrial zones, and shipping corridors. The lines on the economic map were turning into real targets in the field. And those targets were waiting in 7 states, which is precisely where the next part of this investigation would lead. When investigators finally understood the scale of Judge Hale's secret work, the tone inside the federal command rooms changed. The evidence they collected no longer appeared to be the actions of one corrupted man. It seemed to be a network that had been protected for years. Once the message on the judge's phone confirmed that he was clearing routes for shipments, the decision to escalate was immediate. Leaders from federal agencies met behind closed doors and agreed that the time for investigation had come to an end, and the time for action had come. They needed a sweeping strike that could break every link in the chain before the cartel shifted its routes or erased its records. The operation received a single name: Crosscut. The goal was simple to describe, but difficult to carry out. The teams wanted to cut through the system at every point where the cartel might run, hide, or reorganize. They tried to strike fast, move silently, and hit every target before dawn. Executing this plan required groups that did not usually move together. FBI units joined with ICE task forces. DEA field teams coordinated with officers from the Department of Homeland Security. Agents reviewed maps, transport corridors, warehouse registries, and shipping records. They drew red lines on boards until each state was linked to the next. By the time the planning was complete, 7 states had turned into a single battlefield. Georgia appeared first on the list. It was the home ground of Judge Hale and the starting point of the financial routes. Florida was second because the ports there had long served as entry points for foreign containers. Texas was next because cartel supply chains often passed through its rural road systems. New Jersey and New York were placed on the list because they held major transportation hubs that connected coastal shipments to inland markets. Illinois was identified due to suspicious storage facilities located near the outskirts of Chicago. Alabama was added at the end after agents traced rented trucks that had been used to move product further into the southeast. The map of the operation looked like a net being pulled tight. The first strike came before the sun rose. In Savannah, federal teams approached a row of riverfront warehouses that had been disguised as abandoned industrial sites. The buildings looked old from the outside, but heat scans showed activity inside. The teams crept between metal walls and broken windows. When the order came, drones rose into the air and circled the rooftops. Their only task was to seal every exit. With the perimeter closed, agents pushed through a side door that had been forced open by time and the ravages of rust. Inside, they found tables covered with packaging tools. Large sacks of chemicals waited beside sealed drums. Shipping logs lay open on desks, each line pointing to containers that had arrived from Venezuela. When suspects began to run toward the loading dock, they found the doors blocked by sensors that warned the teams outside. The escape routes that had worked for years suddenly failed. The building was secured within minutes. While Savannah teams were collecting evidence, another group entered a far different scene in Houston. The target was a small industrial unit located behind a long stretch of gravel. The windows were covered with black film, and the faint scent of chemicals drifted into the air. When federal units arrived, the interior lights were still on. A pair of guards saw the agents and tried to escape across the gravel lot. They ran with desperate speed, but the K-9 units were already in motion. The dogs quickly covered the distance. Scales were covered with powder. The air felt heavy with fumes that stung the eyes. The entire space had been turned into a processing room that operated without fear until that moment. The largest confrontation of the morning unfolded in New Jersey. The teams had identified a trucking distribution hub that served as a meeting point for brokers linked to the cartel. The hub was active even before dawn. Forklifts beeped as they moved along the lanes between trailers. Workers walked with clipboards and radio headsets. When federal vehicles rolled in, chaos rippled across the yard. Several men dropped their clipboards and ran between the rows of trailers. Agents gave chase. Boots hit the ground. Doors slammed shut. The air was filled with shouts and the sound of metal clanging against metal. One suspect attempted to hide inside a refrigerated unit, but thermal sensors detected his body heat within seconds. The scene looked like a maze filled with shadows that barely had time to move before the agents closed in. Farther north, teams in New York executed simultaneous entries into offices that belonged to freight brokers. The rooms were quiet, yet filled with documents that connected shipping routes to foreign ports. Computer screens were left running, displaying spreadsheets with unusual cargo entries. Investigators copied every file they could and photographed every ledger they found. The brokers tried to deny involvement, but the timing of the shipments tied them to containers that matched the logs discovered in Savannah. Their denials weakened as the agents uncovered more evidence. In Illinois, teams focused on a storage site located near old rail yards. The warehouses there were colder and more silent than the others. The dust looked untouched, but the interior told a different story. Hidden behind rows of crates were sealed boxes that contained narcotics. The crates had false labels and fake weight markings. Agents opened them one by one until an entire section of the warehouse created a wide path of seized drugs. The quiet of the rail yard felt out of place next to the discovery. It was as if the place had been built to hide and wait, not to store or deliver goods. Alabama became the last state to be involved in the operation. Officers there targeted a repair shop that had been used for temporary storage. Inside the shop were crates of mixed goods. Some contained tools. Others held bags that hid layers of narcotics under plastic covers. The team searched every corner and found coded documents tucked behind old cabinets. The papers contained sketches that mapped the local road network. The markings matched the same routes described in the digital messages found on the judge's phone. When the dust settled across all 7 states, the numbers began to rise. A total of 1.8 tons of narcotics were seized. The collection included fentanyl, heroin, and meth. 300 firearms were taken, and many had serial numbers that had been scratched away. Approximately $140 million was confiscated in the form of cash, gold, securities, and cryptocurrency assets. Agents also collected coded files, logs, and sketches that outlined the entire supply chain. Each document felt like another thread in a web that had spread far beyond the judge. From the beginning, Operation Crosscut had one purpose. The agents did not want to destroy a single warehouse or arrest a small set of criminals. They attempted to dismantle the network from top to bottom. They tried to remove the roots, the money flow, the protection, and the hidden agreements that had shielded the cartel for years. The operation had now reached the point where the next stage would reveal the people who had helped the network survive from inside the system. The files found in the Newark raid did not scream. They did not carry the noise of sirens or the sharp crack of a battering ram. Instead, they sat quietly in a metal cabinet, locked behind a dusty wall in an office that had once belonged to a port logistics manager. When the drawer opened, the agents expected customs forms or shipping records. What they found instead changed the entire nature of Operation Crosscut. Each folder inside was labeled by month. Each sheet of paper was printed in clean, block letters. The first line on the first page read a sentence no one in the room would forget. Hale guarantees clearance. Do not deviate. That one note confirmed what had already been feared. Judge Marcus Hale was not acting alone. He was not simply protecting cartel shipments with quiet legal delays or dismissed warrants. He was promising clearance. And not just for drugs. He was guaranteeing safety for the system that moved them. He had become the official signature that opened a corridor across America. The documents listed names. Not street aliases or cartel code words, but full names of police officers, city employees, inspectors, and senior-level officials. 21 of them. Among them were 2 sheriffs, a deputy commissioner, 3 city zoning officials, 4 transit supervisors, and over 10 active-duty law enforcement personnel. These were people who had sworn oaths, worn badges, attended public events, and stood in front of classrooms on community safety days. The evidence clearly demonstrated how their roles were utilized. Some were paid to delay inspections. Some were expected to alter or erase police reports. Others were told to ignore surveillance footage or forget GPS pings near suspicious warehouses. A few looked the other way as marked vehicles passed through their zones without question. The files even contained calendar notes that matched container delivery schedules with the work shifts of officers. The patterns were not only precise, they were repeated again and again with mathematical certainty. Investigators tracked the flow of payments and found a total of $8.3 million in bribes distributed over 5 years. The money did not move in large amounts. It was sent in small, timed deposits. Some officers received monthly transfers labeled as consulting fees or logistics review. Others were paid with gift cards, service contracts, or travel packages. One city employee had received 2 years of rent for an apartment that did not appear in his name. Another had his child's school tuition covered by a foundation with no website or public board. In one case, a procurement officer in Chicago approved emergency import waivers that allowed unmarked containers to bypass regular inspections. His signature appeared on 3 separate documents, each tied to shipments that later tested positive for synthetic narcotics. The timing of these approvals matched digital communications between Judge Hale and cartel operatives. It became clear that the network had a rhythm, and each official played their part like instruments in a dark orchestra. What shocked the task force most was the number of layers the network had built to protect itself. There were fallback contacts in each city, replacement inspectors for when someone was absent, and even dummy schedules created to mislead junior officers who were not part of the scheme. In Savannah, a city council member altered a zoning map to permit warehouse expansion near the docks. In Texas, a local fire marshal had delayed safety inspections for storage units that later turned out to be drug holding sites. None of these actions was random. They were part of a living system, one that adapted and survived. It was not a single leak. It was a pipeline built into the government itself. Agents began calling it the Shield. It was the invisible armor that had protected the cartel's movements across states. It allowed them to move faster than enforcement could react. It gave them space to test new routes. It gave them time to disappear when something went wrong. The shield was not made of metal or walls. It was made of silence, signatures, and people who were trusted by the public. This discovery shifted the entire conversation. What had begun as an investigation into one judge now appeared to be a government-enabled smuggling alliance. Prosecutors debated whether the case should be classified as organized crime, domestic conspiracy, or foreign interference. Every classification seemed too small. The parallels with past corruption cases were clear, but none had reached this level of coordination across so many jurisdictions. Historical cases like the New Orleans police scandals or the Miami airport trafficking ring had exposed parts of the system. But Crosscut showed what happened when multiple parts of that system agreed to work together, quietly, efficiently, and for a price. The public reaction to the release of these names was fierce. News stations ran photos of the accused side by side with their official portraits. Some of them had recently received awards or promotions. One officer had even given a speech at a national security conference 3 months earlier. Parents, teachers, and local business owners began to question every handshake, every community event, every budget vote. The betrayal felt personal. In front of courthouses, protests began to form. People carried signs that read, "Who protects us from the protectors?" And the system was never broken. It was bought. Inside police departments, commanders called emergency meetings. Some officers demanded internal reviews to clear their names. Others refused to speak at all. Government offices in all 7 states issued statements. Some were firm, promising cooperation and immediate action. Others were cautious, pointing to the need for complete investigations. A few tried to downplay the scope, referring to the accused individuals as exceptions. But the public was not satisfied. They had seen the ledgers. They had heard the recordings. They had watched the news reports that laid out each payment, each deleted file, and each erased video log. Federal agencies, now entirely in control of the investigation, began to map the connections. Each name from the files became a dot on a growing web. Red lines linked emails, phone records, and bank transfers. Some of the dots began to overlap with new targets. A few led to people who had not yet been named in the press. The agents knew they were still in the middle of it. The shield had been cracked, but not entirely broken. Crosscut had not only uncovered corruption, it had revealed a structure of loyalty between criminals and officials. It had shown how trust could be sold, how law enforcement could be turned into camouflage, and how justice could be hollowed out from within. This was not a case of the cartel invading the system. This was the system opening its own doors and inviting them inside. It was not just about smuggling drugs. It was about building a protected economy around it. The officials were not passive. They were active engineers of silence. They did not just allow corruption. They gave it rules, direction, and cover. In the final pages of the Newark Ledger, there was a line written in smaller print. It read, "Clearance good through next quarter. Reconfirm February." That one sentence conveyed everything the agents needed to know. The machine was still running. It had schedules, it had cycles, and unless it were fully exposed, it would rebuild again. And that was the next challenge. Because behind every signature, behind every quiet delay or friendly favor, there might still be more names. Names that had not yet been written down. Names that were still hiding behind titles, uniforms, and the public's confidence. The federal team understood one thing clearly. If the shield could exist once, it could exist again. And that meant their next move had to reach even deeper than before. Because what was waiting just beyond the known network might be even more dangerous than everything they had uncovered so far. A total of 184 people now face federal charges, including a judge, 21 officers and officials, city employees, financial brokers, and workers who kept the ports and warehouses moving. Their arrests reveal how deeply the Venezuelan cartel reached into the system. The danger no longer came from the streets. It sat inside offices, courtrooms, and government halls. As one agent said, drugs do not enter America on their own. They arrive through the hands of those who hold authority. When the guardians of the law break the law, the threat grows far beyond any shipment. Crosscut is only the first chapter, and what comes next may be even larger. Stay with military power, and if you want to follow every step of this unfolding investigation, remember to subscribe so you never miss the next operation.